All right, welcome back to another episode of Phoenix Edge. This is an RPG podcast, and today we are going to talk about our first impressions with the Secret of Mana Remake HD version. So we're going to talk about that. We had a chance to play it. We haven't beaten it, obviously, but we have played the original, and we've put a couple of hours in onto the remake. So we're going to talk about that. And then also, we are going to rank the entire Final Fantasy mainline games. Not all the spin-offs and everything, but the mainline games. We're going to rank those from, in our opinion, favorite/best to worst. And we're going to talk about each one and like why we rated it where we rated it. And then also, one of our listeners, Leon, he has some comments that he was wanting to know our opinions on World of Final Fantasy. He said he has some doubts, so we're going to talk about that. And he has a fairly long posting. You guys should go check it out. He likes to give his thoughts on each episode, which we really appreciate. And he's kind of in agreement with a couple of our points from last week, but he had a couple of interesting ideas with the Final Fantasy VII Remake. We always like talking about the Final Fantasy VII Remake, so we'll talk about that some on here. And before we get into that, if you are listening to this on iTunes or wherever, you can get the video version by just going to YouTube and typing in Phoenix Edge RPG Podcast. And vice versa. Obviously, if you're watching this, there is an audio version of this episode, so you can just listen to it while you're in the car, at the gym, or whatever the case may be. And I'll put that link in the description. And as always, if you are watching this on YouTube and you enjoy this content, just do us a favor and subscribe. We'd really appreciate that. And one other quick announcement. I'm a Patreon supporter of this Final Fantasy podcast. It's called Ultima Final Fantasy. They invited me on as a patron to do a quick episode on like my feelings with the Final Fantasy franchise. They're plugging the podcast, and if you guys want to check that episode out with me on there, talking about the Final Fantasy franchise and me mumbling for the first 10 minutes before I got comfortable. It's Ultima Final Fantasy. You can look that up. I believe it's only the audio version is available. So, but I'll try to put a link in the description. It should be out by the time this comes out. And but just wanted to throw that out there because I know they're plugging us. So I really appreciate that. But without further ado, Eric, what have you been playing this week?
Oh, good evening, everyone. And well, I've been playing between three things. Obviously, the Secret of Mana remake that we're about to talk about in a few minutes. The other two I've been playing is Bayonetta 2, and the first one came out on Switch this week. And it's basically a port of the Wii U version, the Bayonetta 2. And there isn't too much special beyond that. It is your basic port, but it is a port of one of the best action titles that's ever been made this generation. And on top of that, it's it can be put in portable form now, and it works spectacular in portable form. I've just been playing it in that mode lately because I wanted to try it now, because I've already played the console version and the Wii U version, so I did want to try in that, and it works great. If you're an action player, this game's right up your alley. If you got a Switch, I think it's a must-own, especially if you never played the Wii U version. If you did play the Wii U version, if there is a handheld aspect to it that you like, I would definitely jump on that. But that's mostly what I can say about that.
So it's a good port.
It's a very good port. Clean port. Solid. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah, just because a game is re-released doesn't mean that because it was an original game or a great game originally, that it will necessarily be a good game when it's re-released. So we see that kind of often. It's usually 50-50 with these ports. So it's good to know that that's actually one of the good cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, you do have to watch out and make sure that the transition went smoothly, because even when they like put Dark Souls from console to PC, there was a lot of trouble on that, and mostly because another company handled the port. But like, I would definitely just do your research every time like a port of a game that's like already been out comes out.
Yeah, you got to be careful. Even with, we're going to talk about World of Final Fantasy later, but I was thinking about getting it on Steam because I just like playing on the computer sometimes, and I was reading the reviews, and they were apparently with my video card, it was having issues, and like people weren't able to finish the game. and I had almost purchased it if I hadn't have read the reviews. So you got to be careful.
The other game I played this week is the 3D. Speaking of ports, the 3DS port of Radiant Historia came out this week. Also, I've been putting a fair amount of time into that, and I would love to do a full discussion of it one day because it's that great of a game. But basically, it is a port of the DS version, and there's a few differences though. They added voice acting. They added new art. The new art's kind of controversial with people, but I like it. I like the original art a little better, but this one is pretty solid also. It's very clean. For the game itself, it was easily one of the best RPGs on the DS. It took time travel functions and made it unique to the gameplay experience. Like there's a point like in the stories where like it'll split off. Like if you decide to join the army or decide to stay like with your special intelligence course, there's like two separate timelines that go, and you have to transition between each timeline and the other to obtain certain things in the game to let you progress further in it, and stories progress as through the two storylines of which one you choose, and you know these different pathways keep popping up, and and the choices you make are like pretty much determining how you get to the end of it. It's very unique that you use the time mechanics in this fashion, and I mean it's very clean. You think it sounds complex at first, but it really isn't. It gets very simple to play. It's like there's a point where it's like, okay, I just got the explosives from this timeline, and the other timeline I couldn't get through the mine because I didn't have explosives, but now I do. And in terms of the battle system, it's your basic turn-based battle system, but the enemies are on a grid, and you have the ability to push them back on the grid. The further they're back on the grid, the less damage they can do to you, and the more damage you can do to them. So you want to use strategic elements like pushing enemies back or pushing them to the left, because you can make enemies knock into each other and both fall on the back at the same time. So you want to change your strategies accordingly to make sure that you get those enemies back there and you hit them with the hardest things you can for what they're weak to. And it's a unique element to it while not being overbearing or anything. It's very easy to pick up. The voice acting they did add in the game is very solid. I didn't have any particular problem with any of them.
Yeah, that's always makes me nervous when I find out that they're like, I don't know, just when it's like a mobile title or something like that, and I find out they're putting voice acting in it, it always makes me like really nervous. Like, oh, this isn't going to be very good.
Yeah, especially
it was good in this case.
Yeah, especially like the DS and 3DS speakers, you're kind of weary because they have to fit so much in the sound on the in the cartridge that sometimes the sound sounds a little off or a little too fast or something. But this one, it feels just right. I would have to check again, but I think there is like a way to set it to Japanese or turn it off if you don't like the voice acting or you don't like the English voice acting. But I'd say this is definitely worth a purchase. This is one of the better RPGs that came out when we were in a RPG or JRPG rut in the later 2000s. So definitely look that up, or you can find the original DS version pretty cheap. I think it's like $15 to $20 if you look for it online, and it's $40 for the 3DS version. But the 3DS version does add a lot of additional stuff to it, including content. So if you want the definitive version, it is the 3DS one.
Very cool. It's always a good day when the remastered version or the re-release is the new definitive version. So that's awesome, dude. I'll have to check that out. I've played it a fair amount. Like I played the first couple of hours, and it wasn't necessarily like I didn't stop playing it because like I wasn't interested. I stopped playing it because just life got in the way, and like, you know, after a while, after you haven't played it, because life's just got busy. If you haven't played a game in a couple of months, you're like, do I really want to start off at the beginning of the game or where I left off? Because I kind of a little hazy at the beginning, and It's just one of those deals. So I'm definitely going to pick that back up, hopefully pretty soon.
Yeah, I've been there plenty of times, man. I feel you.
Yeah. So with me, what have I been playing? Honestly, besides the Secret of Mana remake, I keep feeling like I shouldn't say remake, but it really is a remake. But anyways, we'll talk about that. But besides that, I played some more of the Zodiac Age. I mean, I talked about that last week, so I don't think I want to bore you guys with me talking about the greatest game of all time. No, I'm just kidding. But Final Fantasy 12, I love that game. The PC version is very, very good. I would recommend it. So enough said with that. But let's go ahead and move into the Secret of Mana remake discussion here. We haven't beat the game, at least the remastered version, the remake version. I'm just going to call it remake from here on out because that's what it is. So I haven't beaten it. Eric, you haven't beaten it, right? You've only played.
No, I've only gotten to the Witch's Castle, which is like roughly just a few hours into the game.
Yeah, so it's enough to get a good feel of it, especially if you've already played the original. And I've only played a few hours of it myself. And you know what? I was kind of hesitant to buy it, honestly. I was messaging Eric about it because like day one, like the reviews were coming out and like Polygon was giving it a 5.5. IGN gave it kind of a lower score. It was in the 7s, which is still pretty good, but you think Secret of Mana, like it's like widely regarded as like one of the best early action RPG games. A lot of people have a lot of nostalgia over it. And, just to have like a remade version of that game getting the 7s, it was like kind of anticlimactic because like imagine if the Final Fantasy 7 remake came out and IGN gave it a 7.5. Like you'd be like, okay, like 7.5 is like decent for like a new game, but for a classic, that's not good. Like it really had me thinking like, oh man, they really did not do a good job with this game. But I ended up buying it and checking it out for a little bit. And, I don't think it's as bad as some of the websites were saying. I do think the voice acting is, in many cases, downright terrible. And, they could have done a little better work. I think, honestly, it seemed a little strange that they chose to commit resources to every character in the game, even like the shopkeeper having a voice actor. I think they could have done with just like, scenes having voice acting, and maybe it would have been a little higher quality. And I think I've seen a few places where people complain that the mouth doesn't move, which I also find strange. But I mean, honestly, like I think it pretty much plays like the original. The graphics, I'm not too like over the top about, but I don't think it's terrible. I do prefer the pixel art of the original, but I think this is a pretty good version. It's not, I have some issues with it. It is kind of strange that they didn't fix some of the mechanical issues the original game had. Like, for me, I don't like the whole menu system. Just like, I just didn't like that. So like, I mean, they adjusted a little bit, but like I didn't like that at all. I don't like parts of the battle system. It's not that I don't feel like I shouldn't say I don't like, but I feel like it could have been modernized a little bit. And I think what a lot of people were thinking was they were going to reimagine Secret of Mana and like it's going to be this new experience. But really, it seems like it's just the same game with like some like low budget 3D graphics, basically. I don't know. What'd you think?
It was pretty much what I expected it to be. But what people should really realize before then is I'm talking to someone that loves Secret of Mana. I love the original game. It's I can pick it up anytime and have enjoyable time with it even today. But there were a lot of flaws to the original, like sometimes like the hit detection, the AIs were really dumb and getting themselves killed all the time, and you always have to keep looking after them and healing them when you yourself are doing just fine dodging things. And then I mean, those were like the biggest faults with it, and like the menu system was a little clunky to get through. With the Secret of Mana remake though, they do address a couple things. Like it's like like you have full analog, so it's much easier to position yourself in battle and dodge things. You don't get hit while you're unconscious anymore. And, there are small little quality of life stuff like that makes the game feel easier overall to take on. Some of the problems I'm having so far is that the faults of the original were not entirely addressed. Like, the AI is still dumb. It's kind of, I think that's really my biggest complaint. But the menu is still a little clunky to get through. You have some shortcuts now, but and then there isn't like a more convenient way to save. I think there's like some kind of autosave feature on there. I haven't died yet, so I haven't really been able to experiment with that. But you still have to save by going to an inn or finding a merchant along the road who can save for you. I mean, that's still the case. And you mentioned the voice acting, and the voice acting is very interesting because, like, first off, they gave every NPC a voice, which I'm very surprised they did. The thing is, it all. What were you gonna say?
Go ahead. Well, I was gonna say, like, so some of it's like surprisingly like not that bad, and then some of it's just terrible, and then some of it seems odd. Like the voice actor that does Gemma, like it's just like. Okay, the character is this like old white guy, knightly, like European looking knight. And it's so clear to me, at least, that the voice actor is like some Japanese guy with like a Japanese accent speaking English. I don't know, to me, like to some people that might really bother them, but to me, it just kind of made me laugh. And like, I don't know, that was
it. The voice acting to me just feels flat overall, and it doesn't sound high quality either. Like, it sounds like they did recordings like in a broom closet or something.
Yeah. It's like, it's, I don't know. From what I was seeing in a lot of the like more like IGN reviews and such like that, they were saying that like, hey, some of the scenes in the game that were originally kind of emotional were kind of fell flat now because of the voice acting. Like it just like kind of like sank the moment. So that's why they recommended like you just play without the voice acting. I don't know. So did you ever try that?
I haven't. I mean, like I said, I'm not as sensitive to this stuff, so I do want to hear what it's like so I can give a full fair assessment of it. But it is entirely the optional to turn off if you don't like it, and turn it off and try to have the most nostalgic experience you can have. The soundtrack though is hit or miss for me. Some things sound pretty great, some things don't as much. It's like they really ramped up the remix of it and went over the top with it compared to the original. And I compare the two all the time. I'm going to the menu and comparing the original to the remake and see what they did. And it's like this one's a little more subtle, and they really went over the top with it. Like in the Dorf area, and like they just like really went all out on that. And like you go in, and it's just supposed to be like a simple like we're underground dwarves type of theme, and they just like someone just went all in on that in the sound department.
Yeah,
but
I think with me the soundtrack is the same way. I mean, some of the tracks were I was actually like, wow, I kind of like this version better. And then some of them you're like, I don't know, man. Like this is somebody like, I don't know. They were drink too much coffee while they were like remixing this or something. Like it's just like, ooh, all right, let's go to the original here. But
I think it sounds fine overall. I've kept it. I haven't decided to put it back on the original because I want to hear everything. But
yeah, that's kind of how I am with a lot of games where I'm just like, as long as it's like 80% of it's like reasonable, like I'm whatever. Okay. But one thing I did see that a lot of hardcore, like, and I'm talking about hardcore Secret of Mana fans, like people that like participate in like forum discussions and about it and stuff. Like, apparently the original Secret of Mana game, it went through a lot of like personnel changes and everything, and they had to make some significant cuts to the story to like meet a deadline or something like that. Along those lines. I might be getting some of it wrong.
I know the story to that,
and
it's
yeah.
It was the game was originally supposed to come out on the Nintendo PlayStation. If you don't know what the Nintendo PlayStation is, that was back then in the early 90s. Nintendo and Sony were actually being partners together to make a disc-based console off the SNES, like how the Sega CD was off the Sega Genesis. Nintendo was actually doing their own thing, and they partnered with Sony to make the Nintendo PlayStation. It's actually what it was called, funny enough. But they were making Secret of Mana, Seiken Densetsu 2, its original name is, if that's the way the Japanese say it correctly, yeah, whatever. But it was going to be made for that, but then, it never came through with Nintendo and PlayStation. Sony went off and did their own thing, of course, how that turned out. But so it turned out, since the game was built specifically for that, they had to downgrade a lot of things. And on top of that, they didn't get to finish everything, and there was supposed to be actually more content in the game, and they had to cut all that also. So what we have is a very cut, condensed version of the game. And I think what the hardcore community was hoping for was that they would add in what they were originally intending to do with Secret of Mana, but wasn't able to. And honestly, I would never see that happening, just because the original creators of the game are not there anymore. Most of them are not there anymore. So we don't really know what they were going to do with the rest of that content. So if you had people who were not familiar with the development process of the original game, we wouldn't be able to predict what we get. I mean, it certainly wouldn't be what the developers originally intended to do with it. So I'm not really sure why people are clamoring for something that we can't get unless we get all the developers together and they all remember simultaneously what they were going to do with it.
Yeah, I can see why people would want it, right? It's kind of like the same crowd that wants Square to they really think that there's a possibility that Final Fantasy 15 is going to be re-released with Versus 13, and they'll actually finally get to learn that story. It's well, the actual game, the final release actually came out, and I think it would be very counterproductive to release that version, especially with Secret of Mana's case, because it's critically acclaimed. There's a good chance it might not be a very good story with all this other stuff in it, but at the same time, I can see why they would want that in there, because when you play Secret of Mana, to be honest, you can tell the story is pretty bare bones. It's enough to chew on for a little bit, and it's enough to justify going to locations, but it's not Final Fantasy VI.
Yeah, the story is a complement to the gameplay, certainly, because you're in the gameplay motion most of the time. You have more story at the beginning to kick off and some in the middle and end, but it's mostly, Zelda is clearly its inspiration for it. Even back to the first Seiken Densetsu game, Adventure of Mana. It's very clearly based off, it's their take on Zelda, and they definitely do enough to make their own unique thing to it. But, that's the clear inspiration. So, story is supplementary to the gameplay itself. Now, it's still a fun story. Just that's just how it's built and designed.
Yeah. So, but hey, you know what? It's I got my version. I've been finding this website I go to. It's Green Man Gaming or something. I don't know. I guess it's some European website that's kind of like Steam or something like that. I don't know. When I go there, I'm able to get new releases for a little bit cheaper, and they send me the Steam code. And so I got the game for, I think, $28 or something. But how much did you spend?
I got the physical copy from GameStop because that's the only place you can get it. And I paid $40 for it. I wanted the physical version.
And I was so angry that I did not do that. I'm still thinking about going out to GameStop and getting that version because I just want the case,
It's got the same case as the Super Nintendo one, the artwork for it. So it's pretty nice.
Yeah. So in that case, if you have not picked up Secret of Mana and you're thinking about it, spend the $40, go to GameStop. If they still have the case, honestly, I think because with this game's reception, it seems pretty hit or miss. with a lot of people. Some people are really upset about it. Maybe they're expecting too much. So I think there's probably going to be a fair amount of used copies if you wanted to go that route. But yeah, pick it up if you want to. You know, it's not going to be a new experience per se, but it does fix a few things and doesn't really fix some other things. But if you like Secret of Mana, you can now play it on your HD TV, which is a plus.
It's a faithful remake, for better or for worse. And I will give a public service announcement for it. There are 3 versions of the game. You can get it on PS4. You can get it. They have enhanced version of it for PS4 Pro. I mean, you just buy the game. And it's a little bit enhanced for the PS4 Pro. It's on PC and it's actually on Vita also. That's why the graphical fidelity is the way it is, because it is ultimately a Vita game. If people are wondering why it is the way it is. But here's the one big issue, though, is that the Vita version runs horribly compared to the PS4 and PC version. Like, the PS4 Pro version can run 4K at a solid 60 frames per second. It never drops. And you can even do like widescreen 4K on it. It's that crazy. That's like,
and 60 FPS for this game might make a little more sense, right? Because it's not like there's a lot of like technique involved in like waiting and attacking, right?
Right. Now, the Vita version is technically 60 frames per second, but it is rarely there. It is actually usually at 30 frames or below. It can drop down to 20. And not only that, like the only time I saw comparison videos, the only time you can get 60 frames per second in the Vita version is if you're like in a very small room, where like a non-battle small room.
Yeah, so a place you don't even need it.
Yeah.
Really.
So unless you're really hankering for the handheld version of it, I would not recommend that version. I would stick to the PC, the PS4 Pro version. And they all work very well, stay at solid 60 frames per second rather than you're in 1080p or 4K, as long as your PC can run it. And just giving that one little warning.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of the reviews, depending on what version they were reviewing, had wildly different statements. So that's a good thing to point out. Moving on, though, we are going to rate our top we're going to rate the entire Final Fantasy franchise, mainly the mainline games, from best to worst, in our opinion, of course. And I think we're going to have some different opinions on certain placements in games, but we're going to go by and just say, hey, what's your first one? Okay, my first one is this. What's your second one? So forth. And we're going to talk about why we put it where we put it. Probably by the time we get towards the end of this list, I imagine that we're probably going to get pretty similar, but that's kind of interesting thing to see. So we're going to check this out here.
Just making sure it's mainline games, right?
Yeah, just mainline games. Yeah, I was thinking, well, what if we did the like spin-offs and then like anything with Final Fantasy, and it's like, no, okay, now we're getting to like 40
If we're doing
games,
spin-off games, I'm like, crap, I gotta redo this.
Yeah, well, I would have to think about it for a while. I'm just like,
yeah.
It's like
15 is enough.
So, yeah. So, in my list, I did not put the online game, so.
I sure did.
Okay. Well, what's your number one pick? And then I'm going to go ahead and, I'll just do this on the fly. I know where I can stick these games.
We'll
see. So what's your number one
pick? I brought all my
pick?
games in front of me just because I'm a nerd and I like to show off. I have a great game wall over here. And I swear I'm going to make my camera, I'm going to get a camera that's going to be over here and it's going to show everything. And I'm going to be just showing it off all the time as soon as I'm able to. But I'm getting that stuff set up right now. Some people have seen it before. But anyways, I brought a little bit of it here because I want to show off my nerdness and everything. And the first, of course, favorite, if anyone knows me, is Final Fantasy IX right here. That is definitely my favorite Final Fantasy ever. And nothing has been able to get close to it except one, which is the second favorite.
See, and my number one pick is the same game. So why did you pick Final Fantasy IX as your favorite?
It feels like a celebration of everything before it in all the right ways. It brings back the classic style Final Fantasy, and well, for its time, like in its own modern way, it had a colorful cast of characters, a lovable, colorful cast of characters. You were interested in each one of them, and the world itself was very interesting. And like, I was just never bored from beginning to end. Like, just starting as a theater troupe trying to kidnap the princess and everything that leads to like the final dungeon of the game. It's just spectacular. I love playing it every time. I'm thinking about going through it again on the PS4 version, even though, last year I went through it on my tablet, but I want the trophies this time. Maybe an Excalibur 2, but it hits all the right notes for me as a Final Fantasy fan. And to this day, like just nothing tops it for me.
Yeah, honestly, I'm in the same boat. Like, look, when I first played this game, I had not played all the older games. Only Final Fantasy games I had played when I first played this game was Final Fantasy 7 and 8. So I didn't get a lot of the references. So for me, I know a lot of people say like, oh yeah, it's a good game because it's a callback to the other Final Fantasies, but you have to play the other Final Fantasies to enjoy it. I don't think that's the case. I loved it right out the gate. I loved how tropey it was in the beginning, but it kind of like spun a lot of common tropes for fantasy style stories on its head. Like right out the gate, you're supposed to steal the princess. Like, okay, like ha ha ha, that's every fairy tale ever, right? But then, oh, she wants to be captured. But then, oh, like this happens and that happens. I don't want to spoil the whole game, but it really, I felt like conceptually it really matched like what the story was trying to tell, because the whole thing's like about like being innocent and then coming to terms with the reality of the world, like what Vivi deals with, realizing his own mortality and that he will die one day. I mean, that's really what the game is. It starts off very fantasy like, very fairy tale, like something you might have heard when you were a child. And by the end of the game, man, like you've woken up, you're an adult now, like you're really gripping with some serious stuff. So, like, dude, hands down, like this is a great game. I do find the forest card game, I thought that was ridiculous. And that point where Sid has to get the key to unlock the dungeon with the whole dude that like you have to move whenever he's not looking at you. That part of the game is like hilarious, but it's just like I didn't like that part of the game.
It does suffer some woes from being on the PlayStation 1, and there are times where the battle system does feel a little slow for it. But, just everything else in the game, even down to the equipment system, like just everything just makes up for like any negative aspects it has.
Yep. Equipment system, awesome. You can use you'll have to use old equipment for the entire game at certain points. So very, very cool. So moving on. What is your second pick? And then I'll tell you.
All right. Number 2 classic is, well, I got the Super Nintendo version here, but Final Fantasy VI, or known as Final Fantasy III in America for a while. This is definitely one of the best 2D pixel art games I have ever played. It has so much life and expression in the characters. It has an interesting world. It has an interesting plot twist of the story. It has one of the greatest, possibly the greatest Final Fantasy villain ever. And like, it's unbelievable that you get this large amount of cast of characters and you manage to make each one interesting in their own right. On top of that, it has beautiful music. Just to mention 9 has beautiful music also, but and they all have great music. I'm going to be saying that each time, but the gameplay is simple but solid. It's turn-based. You can use espers to equip magic on you to create the kind of characters you want, but each character still has their own unique traits that makes you decide who you want in the party and not in the party, especially when you have the 3-party system. I mean, it's a fantastic game. It's a must own for anyone. I don't recommend the MS Paint version. The Steam iOS version, but it's, play it on the Super Nintendo, the Game Boy Advance, or if you don't have access to any of those, the PS1 version, or the PS1 version, or the emulated version of the PS1 version on PSN, you can get 6 in the Anthology pack for PS1, which is relatively cheap, but you do have to deal with pretty bad loading times for it. But, I mean, in any way you get it, it needs to be something that's part of your life.
Very cool. Before I tell you my second pick, I'll just go ahead and give my thoughts on Final Fantasy VI as well. That way we're not like just like repeating constantly. But I think that's a great game. I think it's probably my favorite on the Super Nintendo. And just like from a technology standpoint, like what they accomplished with that game is just amazing. Like some of the, like the advanced camera techniques on the Super Nintendo, the fact that like people even talk about camera techniques on Super Nintendo is like word enough for how advanced this game is. And just like the level of story is just amazing, that like these are just like some 16-bit characters and like you actually care about them. So all in all, it's just hands down, it's an amazing game. Music's fantastic. However, I did not put Final Fantasy VI as my second favorite game. I put Final Fantasy VII. Now, yeah, so the reason I put 7 was because it was my first Final Fantasy. And I don't know, man, that's where it all started off for me. That's like where I freaking, like, that's just like where it all began for me. I played the crap out of it when I was a kid. I've beaten it several times. I own several versions of the game. And I mean, some of the scenes in it are just classic, like Tifa just having that slap fight, or just Cloud doing the cross-dressing thing. And it's just a really good game. And like it really, I think a lot of RPGs today that like are big owe a lot to Final Fantasy VII, because I think that was the first one that actually, like, at least for JRPGs, really just like sank it home and was like a blockbuster hit. And I think it really revolutionized a lot of the way you tell stories in games. I mean, I really think like a lot of what we see today started, you can trace it back to Final Fantasy VII. So, I mean, it's a little, the character models are a little hard to get used to today. If you've never played the game before, you're not used to that era. But, if you just play, 6 or 7 hours of the game, well, you'll kind of get past it and you'll get engrossed in the plot. And it's really a fun ride. I really have a good time with it. The only thing I do not like about Final Fantasy VII is Cait Sith. I find that character to be absolutely preposterous, that some man just like sits in a room all day on a laptop and controls this character from a laptop or something. Or maybe like I'm missing something, but that's always what it seems like. He's just remote controlling this like robotic cat 24/7. And I just, I don't like
it was Reeve's way of fighting back against Shinra. Since he worked for Shinra on part of the highest parts of Shinra, he used Cait Sith as a means to follow and track the party and everything. But in terms of Final Fantasy VII, it's definitely higher on my list. I'll get to it in a sec. But it not only is Final Fantasy VII a great game, it is an important game. It did so many things to push the JRPG industry forward. It made the genre into like a cinematic experience. It brought like a new modern punk techno type of feeling to Final Fantasy VII, especially like in Midgar. It definitely brought Final Fantasy in a new direction, and some can debate that they like the ways of the Super Nintendo more. And then you got the other people who say they love how Final Fantasy VII is. They want more like that. 7 was a game changer, not just for Final Fantasy, but for JRPGs in general. And on top of that, it's just a straight out awesome RPG. I'll always recommend it to people. I know the polygons are hard to look at. It's outdated looking. That's definitely a thing, but you got the remake coming out whenever they decide to release that. But I do wish that if you really want to know the pinnacle of the JRPGs, like it started with Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I wish they would do is the PS4 remaster, honestly, I think is like the definitive version. I really like that version, but I wish they would have done that version with the option of having a newly relocalized script, because just some of the I've seen a couple of interviews where some of the story segments are a little lost in translation unless you play it a few times. And I think it would be a stronger experience if they would do that. But the thing is, like, Final Fantasy VII has kind of gotten to that level of, like, if you mess with anything, people are upset. So, but just for like newer players, if they're just playing it the first time, I think some of the grammar issues or whatever you'll see occasionally because of the quick translation is kind of will kind of be hard to get over if you're used to that really polished look. But yeah, once you get past that, it's smooth sailing. So
it's an important game to play. I do encourage anyone to look past it and just try it out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on, I put 9 and then 7, and then you put 9 and then 6. Mm-hmm. Real quick, why did you put 7 or 6 above 7?
Why I put 6 above 7?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of hard to say. I think I just overall enjoyed 6 more than 7. If I'm, I acknowledge how important FF7 is, but I still think in terms of the world and character building and everything, the villain wise, I do lean more towards 6 than 7.
Yeah.
And 7's not even third on my list.
Oh boy. Okay.
And we want to go down this great.
Yeah. So like, we're going to go on. I mean, I can, anytime somebody will try to make a case for me why 6 is better than 7, I'm just like, okay, that's a reasonable argument. But with me, like 7, that's where it started. So, but number 3, go ahead. What is your third one? I thought for sure this was going to be Final Fantasy VII for you, but I guess not. So what is it?
Okay. Well, this is the first Final Fantasy I ever played. This was back when I had to have been, I would probably say 7 years old. I was born in 89. So, I was kind of late. A little bit late to things, but I got myself on track. But Super Mario RPG was my first JRPG. But along with that, I also played Final Fantasy IV, which I have in my hand right here, known as Final Fantasy II in America before they changed it back the way it was. And this is the first game. Well, not the first game. Final Fantasy II presented unique characters and had a more character-driven plot than FF1. And FF3, they went back to the roots of 1 and how that worked. But 4 pretty much mainstreamed the idea of having unique made characters with their own arcs and stories. And they popularized that. And that's how Final Fantasy has been ever since. And it has for a Super Nintendo game, it has an emotionally driven story. I mean, like Cecil as a Dark Knight questioning his allegiance to quote unquote an evil like kingdom. And, he's wanting to, he wants redemption for his ways as a Dark Knight. I mean, all this stuff in a Super Nintendo game back then, people were just baffled by just like how much like quality story was made in this. And the theme of love, by Nobuo Uematsu, like that's played by children in Japan today. That's like in their sheets or like when they take music class. I mean, like Final Fantasy IV has such a huge impact, and the remakes and everything like that would come after it. Like it's been remade a lot of times, but like, I mean, this is really one that started mainstreaming the Final Fantasy series, and I highly recommend like this one to anyone. I think the best version, in my opinion, is the PSP version that you can get digitally on the Vita also, or the PSTV. But the DS remake is also really good. That one has the voice acting and the 3D models. That one's really good too. If you want to play it in a different fashion, that one is on DS, the mobile devices, and it is on Steam if you want to try any of them. So great game, highly recommend it.
Yeah, honestly, Final Fantasy IV, that is not my third pick. However, I always like Final Fantasy IV when I'm thinking about where I want to rate these games. And like a lot of times people say, hey, what's your top 5 favorite Final Fantasy when you're talking to other Final Fantasy fans? I'm always like at a loss where to put Final Fantasy IV because I really like that game. It has a lot of weight to the story. I think it's the first one that really knocked it out of the park with the story. I think so much of it is just interesting. The story of Cecil and just him getting redemption basically, and then really just turning a complete 180 is just a really good story. And I'm always like really struggling where to put that in my ranking because it is a great, great game. But I had to put in my number 3 spot, I had to put Final Fantasy X. And I know a lot of people like to put that game pretty a lot lower. Some people put it in the 6 or 7. Some people put it as their number 1. I think for me, number 3 is a good spot because when I played the game like right when it came out. So I think when you rate games or review games or analyze games, you really have to think about the context of what was it like? What was the scene like when this game came out, right? So a lot of people like to say, oh, Final Fantasy X, the voice acting. Well, you're comparing it to games that come out now, like, right? This was the first game that had voice acting, and honestly, it's still pretty good. There's some cheesy scenes in it, yeah, but most of them are pretty good. The story is just freaking on point. It has a great ending. The battle system is fantastic. I mean, this is one of my favorite games to play. They've invested so much in just when you're traveling the world, you can there's so much stuff for you to interact with and learn about what's going on. When you replay the game, there's so much little tidbits for you to appreciate. When you're swimming through the airship in the beginning of the game, you realize oh, this is the airship that I'm going to be in later. Or you're in the first temple and you see a statue. First time you played it, you thought it was just some typical RPG statue. Doesn't mean anything. But then you're looking at it now and you realize, oh man, this is Unaleska. Or this is Braska or whatever. There's so much in it that for you to sink your teeth into, and if you can get past a couple of cheesy scenes, it's really a great game. And in my opinion, this was I love Final Fantasy 12. I'll talk about that later, but this was to me the last truly fantastic Final Fantasy, the one that really knocked it out of the park. This is the last one for me, of at least the offline ones. So I really hope that Square can at least get back to this level of storytelling in the future. But
Final Fantasy X is an incredible game. That is definitely one of the best RPGs on PS2 without a doubt. I remember that was one of the first games I got at the PS2. I got it, I think I was 13 years old when it came out. And I was so excited to play. I got that with my PS2 for Christmas. I plugged it in, man. I played that nonstop. I mean, everything just felt so great, so modern, so new feeling. And
it was immersive.
It was so immersive. I love the world of Spira. It's it may have been a linear game, but you learn so much of the world when you get by the end of it. And and I feel like a better, a stronger person as the main character going through all of that. You talked about the voice acting. I don't have a particular problem with any of the voice acting. Even today, if I'm trying to be as objective as possible with it, nothing really seems that bad. There are some awkward direction scenes, to be sure. Directed scenes, but the voice actors themselves are not bad. I can't really imagine anyone else in these voices. I'm sure someone could, but Tara Strong as Riku, James Arnold Taylor as Titus, John DiMaggio as Waka. It's I can't imagine anyone else doing these voices. It's so iconic to them. And so it sounds weird when you have a different voice actor doing them in some other game, but I thought it was great. I thought it was great voice acting. It's a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that, but I think they did solid enough.
Yeah. I think some people I think they're mistaking cheesy scenes or poorly directed scenes for bad voice acting. And overall, I agree, man. I think it's pretty good. I would not change any of them. Just there's a handful of scenes really maybe off top of my head, the laughing scene, that was, I guess you could redo that. Then there's a scene where
even then there
Tidus
was like, it was just awkward, and like even in the script,
it was supposed to be
do awkward laugh. It's like, okay, ha 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 ha.
Yeah, it was supposed to be awkward, and everyone's like, dude, that was awkward. It was bad. And I was like, well, I don't know. So maybe they could have done that a little bit better, where people realized that it was supposed to be that way. Or I think there's one scene that's particularly bad in my mind, where when you first get to Luca and Tidus, I keep saying Tidus because I know that's what it's supposed to be, but to me, it's always been Tidus. He takes out his like some megaphone. That like, where did he get it? And he's like, yeah, right, you Luca goers, we're going to take you down. Blah, blah. I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible. Yeah, I was just like, what? Stop doing that. I want to act like that never happened. But most of the time, like it's really good. So I don't really have an issue with it. But I think, like I said, some people I think are putting like a today's lens on it. Like they'll complain about the camera work and stuff, which is fine. You know, that is a criticism, but I don't know. It's not like back then. It wasn't as much of an issue, and I think it was more groundbreaking than it had problems. So that's my thoughts.
It's an incredible game, and they came out with the HD remastered version for PS3 and PS4 and PC, and they did a great job with it. The soundtrack is the remastered soundtrack is very iffy, but they do let you switch back to the original one, so no big deal on there. Try it out. Fantastic game. The ending legitimately got a tear out of me. So you know, that it has a great relationship built between Tidus and Yuna. Some people may disagree with me, but I mean I believe them as a you know, how their relationship like built up. So
very cool. Yeah, I mean I don't have a problem with it either, so that's just me though. Anyways, number
four. Let's see here. Well, you waited for it. Huh? Here it is. Final Fantasy VII. That's on my number 4 list. This isn't my original copy, but that one got damaged, unfortunately. So I have a greatest hits one in my hand that I bought like a year or two later. But yeah,
that's fine.
4th favorite. Like I said, it's an important game to, and it is. One of the first PlayStation RPGs I played. This was like the pinnacle of the golden era of JRPGs. Final Fantasy VII kicked it off, and you know, and it just started getting better and tremendous from there. And I think everyone just needs to thank FF7 on that front.
Yep. You already heard my thoughts on Final Fantasy VII. Great game, but for me. My 4th one is Final Fantasy VI, which we just talked about. But I mean, dude, it's a great game. It's a great Super Nintendo game. It's got a great story. It's just phenomenal, and I think every way. I mean, there's very little for me to complain about. So I mean, it's truly a great game. So, but moving on, number 5. What did you put for 5?
Here? All right, that would. It's kind of funny that's on number 5 because my 5th is Final Fantasy V.
Oh wow! So Final Fantasy V made your top 5.
I have the Game Boy Advance version here because they never came out with the original SNES version in America. They were actually going to, and it was going to be called Final Fantasy USA, but we were so behind on getting the game that they just straight out just jumped to 6 and called it FF3. And I mean, I can kind of get where they're coming from that, but we never actually got to see an American release of it till Final Fantasy Anthology. I did have an Anthology up there also, but I decided to get this one instead. But it came out with Final Fantasy V, and just like 6, it had like bad loading times, but this was the only version of the game that we did have until the Game Boy Advance version came out. The Game Boy Advance version is pretty much like the definitive version if you don't want it like completely redone, and it has the proper translation. They added a couple new dungeons to it, but the game itself, it's absolutely like awesome experience. It's a very lighthearted adventure with like a likable cast of characters: Bart, Lena, Galuf, Ferris, Krill. Great characters. Like the game is more, like I said, it's more lighthearted. When coming from 4, that was a very serious like game, and then going to 6, which is a very serious game with like lighthearted moments itself. But like FF5 is more like a lighthearted game with occasional like dark moments to it. It knows when to be like fun, and it knows when to be serious, and it does such a smooth transition to it. It's so it's just so fun. It kind of reminds me of like Dragon Quest in some ways, but it has a fantastic job system. It is easy to break the game if you grind a little bit on these jobs, but they're very solid built. You can make your own type of parties. You can approach the game the way you want to. I think my one criticism is that the villain is very one-dimensional. No pun intended if you've played the game, because dimensional portals are a thing. But X-Death is not exactly the most fascinating villain either. He's more like a force of nature than anything. And but it's more focused on the protagonist. And you kind of get the gist of X-Death through some exposition. So he's just evil and wants to destroy the world because that's what he was built to do. So you just kind of go off from there. But how the game ends and how the game like twists itself around a bit is pretty awesome in itself. And of course, that's another one I highly recommend to people. You can play it on Steam and iOS. It does have that awkward MS Paint like remake to it, but it doesn't look as bad as 6. Just because it came from like somewhere where like the sprites were very tiny and kind of hard to see what they were, except in battle. So, but it does well. It does well enough if you're looking for a version. But I think the GBA version is probably the best version right now.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I've been wanting to revisit that game. When I originally played it, I emulated it because there wasn't actually a version that I could play that I was aware of. And I was like in middle school. So, I had to play a fan translation of the game. And at that point in my life, like I was not about gameplay really. I was all about the story. So whenever I played through games, like I would always just, I'd be at my wits, just like not grinding at all. I would like run through battles that I couldn't get through, just trying to get to the next plot point. So my characters would always be very, very weak. Every boss battle would take me like 7 tries because I would have like very old armor because I didn't have enough money because I would just run from a lot of the battles and I was just all about the story. And only later did I come to appreciate gameplay a little bit more. But I will say that I think now, because originally Final Fantasy V, like it didn't impress me that much with the story. Like I thought it was good, but I didn't think it was like that good as compared to some of the other ones. But now I'm looking back, people are like, dude, the class system and the gameplay is really, really good. It's really refined. There's so many different possibilities that you can do. It's really fun to play. And I've learned some more about like the development of 5 and like kind of their motivations behind making it. A lot of it was very to do with the like more local like lore and like fantasy elements and stuff. And honestly, I didn't realize that a lot of it was supposed to be a comedy based game. And I didn't really get, maybe it was because of the fan translation, but so it makes me kind of want to revisit the game because I might appreciate it a little bit more. I never really hated it, but it was kind of like a game like I really didn't like think about too much. So, but I know it's got a massive following. You put it in your top 5. So at one point I'm going to have to revisit it and kind of look at it with a new lens because it's been a while since I've actually sat down and beat that game. Yeah. So
if you're looking for a very strong story, I don't think 5 delivers the best of them, obviously. But what I do also look for in story is it being fun. Like there's a lot of like movies I watch that I wouldn't say have the most compelling stories either, but they're tremendously fun to watch. And another thing that I look for in my games is making sure that the gameplay is just as strong as the story. And Final Fantasy V more than delivers on the gameplay. So in terms of the balance of it, the gameplay may balance a little more on 5 than the story, but it still works itself out to a beautifully made game.
Yeah, so I think it's something I need to revisit and like really just because I'm a different gamer than I was then. So I think I'll appreciate it some more. But so we just did our fifth one. So, what's my fifth one? So I picked Final Fantasy. It's going to be odd, but 12. I was trying to put this list together, and originally I had 12 as like number 7. And then the more I thought about it, I put it as number 6. And the more I thought about it, I was like, no, I got to put it in my top 5 because it has some serious weak points. And I think because this list is like our favorite Final Fantasy / best, that justifies me putting it in my top 5. If this list was to be, like, what do you think objectively is the best Final Fantasies? Like, from like a analysis point of view, with not putting your favorite stuff in there, I would probably put it a little lower because I think the last third of the game or last half of the game, the story really takes a nosedive. And that is very disappointing for a Final Fantasy. But I just really like this game. I really like the world. I, for the most part, really like the characters. And even when some of their character arcs just kind of don't go anywhere after a while. And the battle system, I really liked it a lot in the original. It was really, really good. And I just really, really enjoyed it. I think the best way to put it is, like, if they released a novel of Final Fantasy 12 and like they actually expanded some of the story, I would actually buy that. And I would read it, and I would probably really enjoy it. And I can't say that about some of the other games. So I think it's just me, like, being really interested in the world itself. But what did you think of 12?
I think 12 is a great game. It definitely has some faults. Like, has a very weak main character, the one that feels like obviously shoehorned in. But Ivalice is definitely one of my favorite Final Fantasy worlds, especially after Tactics and some of the spin-off games revolved around Ivalice. Like, I definitely like the writing and tone that FF12 gives. I kind of like that mature, like, clash of WRPG and JRPG elements. I think they mix it well together. I think Matsuno is a great director and writer, creator of like Tactics and 12, or like, was at the beginning
Vagrant
of 12
story, yeah.
Development, certainly.
Yeah.
But like, I kind of wish that like Final Fantasy just takes on this type of maturity. Like, FF14 definitely has taken on, for the most part, taken on 12's kind of maturity while still retaining itself to the stronger FF elements. I think that's kind of one of the things that may have put some people off about 12 is it doesn't have that many heavy Final Fantasy elements. It has definitely more of the Ivalice world elements to it, because really, if you took the Final Fantasy part out of Ivalice, it could still function on its own just fine. So that may have been what turned people off a little bit on it, but as a game by itself, I mean, it has a fantastic world. It has interesting characters. Like I said, the writing is great. I think some things should have been expanded on more, and we could have gotten a little more writing to Van and Pinello to make them feel like they're more natural to the game. But besides that, I had a fun time with it. I overall enjoyed playing Zodiac Age again, despite how easy it was. The PS4 version, not the PC version. But, I mean, great game.
I think it's great, and if Square could at least get back to releasing games like 12 again, then that would be a step in the right direction. But so we're on to number 6. So where are we at with number 6?
All right, this one's a little big. I gotta pick it up because I'm gonna be collector's edition box.
Oh, geez, what are you picking up there?
All right, everyone hears me say this all the time, but it's got to happen. All right, Final Fantasy 14. I got a big old Stormblood expansion box here of it. Beautiful artwork by Yoshitaka Amano of the character Lise in the game. Fantastic character herself. Now, people are saying to yourself, like, oh, it's an online game. It's like, how could you put that in the top spots where there's other clearly better offline-based single-player games that focus more on the story? It's like, well, 14's a different... is more like a Final Fantasy than you think. I would argue it is more of a stronger Final Fantasy than 13 and 15 put together. it hits, just like 9, it hits like all the right elements and celebrates the Final Fantasy series and things before it in such in a tremendous way. Like the story is so solid, so easy to get into. Like most people who played it have gotten like hooked onto it. They bypass the level 35 trial. They want to see what happens more. Then you get to the Heavensward story and the Stormblood story, and you tell yourself, wow, these are stories that match like the great of Final Fantasy. Like when Naoki Yoshida came in and not only brought the game from being just completely shut down and like just put black marked in by Square Enix, he came in, he saved it. He knows what works well in a Final Fantasy. He knows what works well in an MMO, and he was able to beautifully put these together. And he made like such a solid experience. It is now considered one of the top MMOs ever. And people who play it have said that like these are some of the best Final Fantasy stories they've gotten since like the PS1 era. I mean, they do such a tremendous job in the storytelling in this game. And on top of that, they have like side quests that are just as meaningful feeling as the main stories themselves. I mean, it's absolutely top notch. I play it to this day. I play it every day. I have friends on there. It has a great community. Of course, you're going to find a bad egg here and there. You're going to find a bad egg everywhere you go. But like, community is a strong thing. And on top of that, if you're someone that's weary of the MMO aspect of it, I ask you to make an account, a free account, try it up to level 35, see if you like it or not, because pretty much 90% of the content of the game, the story-wise, can be done by you alone. So if you're not someone that's big into playing with other people, then, you know, at least give it a shot up to level 35. It's free. You can download it on PS4, PC, or if you have a Mac, you can download it on the Mac. But I can't recommend it enough. It just hits all the Final Fantasy strings for me. I've been yearning for years because 13 and 15 definitely didn't do that. So.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, when I made this list, I did not put the online games in there because, frankly, I didn't even think about it. But I don't have any hate towards the online games. I played 14. I'm not as complete with it as you are or as committed, but I did really appreciate it. I did really enjoy it, and honestly, like I think that, like you, especially Final Fantasy 14, as far as being a fan of Final Fantasy. Like that game, at least the Realm Reborn and forward, right? That has done a lot for the series, I think, because I'm not sure without 14 being the success it is, that there would be this much hype around Final Fantasy still. If you think about it, Final Fantasy 12 was a little bit of a disappointment to some people. People really didn't like 13. 14 really like originally crapped the bed. If they hadn't remade that to what it is today, with 15 not really hitting it out of the park either. I think the fact that at least 14 has, been pretty good to great, that's kind of given some people some hope that like, okay, like they can still do this. They can pull through. So, for that reason, hey, I think it's a welcome addition to the Final Fantasy, community. So, that's my thoughts with it. But, and by the way, I do agree that you can play most of what I played anyways, by yourself. So it's not like you need other people. Yeah, you will have to do a dungeon or two where it like makes you, go through with other people, but it selects the people and, you don't have to talk to them. It's not like you guys are talking all the time unless, you know each other, and, which you likely won't if it's random.
If you know your role in the dungeon, you likely don't need to provide any strong communication elements. Like if you're a damage dealer, you know what you're supposed to do is deal damage and dodge mechanics. And if you're a tank, you're supposed to gather all the enemies and tank them all while the DPS take them down. The healers heal you. And if you're a healer, you heal people. I mean, it's a simple triangle like that. Another cool thing about 14 is that you can switch your job on the fly as long as you are in a non-battle stance. Or like as long as you're not fighting an enemy or in a dungeon, you can switch your job anytime. Granted, you have to level that job. But you can, by the press of a button, you can go from black mage to white mage like that. Just pressing a button. But you do have to level them individually. But if you're stuck on deciding what you want to be, you can pick something, try it out. And if you say to yourself, well, I don't really enjoy this one, go unlock the job and try it out. There are some jobs that you have to unlock, like on special cases, like the Heaven's Ward and Stormblood jobs. You need to be level 50 for them and be at a certain story. Not for Stormblood, for Heaven's Ward you do. But those are considered advanced jobs. And you can play jobs that are like them on your way to them. But besides that, you can play what you want on the fly. As you can see, going down the road, you may actually be interested in the community aspects of it. So, like I said, give it a try. Free trial. If you like it, you can go buy it. The sub is $12 to $13 a month.
All right. So because I did not put those games in my list, I'm just going to like superimpose it where you have it. So that way we still have games to compare as we go down. So moving on to the next one in our list, which would be 7 for you. What did you pick as your number 7?
Okay. Well, we've already talked about this one. So Final Fantasy X. Got the original PS2 version here and all. Like I said, fantastic game. One of the best RPGs on the PS2 easily. Mm-hmm.
Boom. All right. So for me, I put as for the spot holder, I put Final Fantasy VIII. Now, I was actually surprised that I ended up putting Final Fantasy VIII this high because if you've ever, I don't know how much I've done on this podcast, but in general, if you know me at all, I tend to, anytime this game is brought up, I tend to bag on it pretty hard. But I have to be completely honest. There's some plot lines and like character arcs in this game that are really fantastic. I think it deserves some of the best that Final Fantasy has ever done. However, at the same time of equal measure, there are some of the worst plot lines, or just like plot points that have ever been done in Final Fantasy. Maybe at least pre PS4, but it's honestly overall it's a really good game. I kind of give it a little bit of slack because I realized they rushed it out because they're trying to capitalize on Final Fantasy VII's success. So the development time was 1.5 years, and I think if they would have taken another year, that maybe then this could have been a truly amazing game. And I realized for a lot of people that this game really was like a defining moment in their life. I can appreciate that. But it has a lot of issues with it that really just hamper my game time with it. I mean, I don't like the fact that the enemies scale level wise with you. The junctioning system is kind of broken. Some of the plot points are really just like make you really scratch your head. Like, I don't think that was really well done. That's kind of left fields, has this left field feel to it. But I mean, all in all, it starts off on a good foot and I feel like it lands on solid ground. And, there's a lot of great moments in the game that are like, should really be experienced. So, and it's got great music too. So, but what did you think about Final Fantasy?
I love the game. I love playing through it. That being said, it does have a lot of flaws to it. Just like FF2 back then, after FF1 came out, like they rushed us right out. They rushed it out the door, like right after 7 came out. Not too long after 8 came, and 8 is still a really good game for what it is. But on the gameplay side, it has a lot of flaws. You can break the junction system right at the beginning. The junction system itself has a lot of flaws that are easy for exploitation, especially if you mix like the GM passive abilities around and everything. Like you can just break that system in just so many ways. It's like so many things they didn't check on. And I think if they had more time, they would have been able to make something better of the system. But I will say that the junction system is one of my least favorite parts, or least favorite things of character boosting in the game, along with on top of the enemies who are leveling alongside with you, which I'm scratching my head on why they would ever do that. But
yeah, because it makes the battles, every time you fight a battle, it's punishing you.
yeah, I mean, enemies
right?
have
It punishes you to do random.
enemies have more or less abilities when they level up. But I guess in terms of like the story, the world, the characters, that's the part I really like. That's the part that keeps driving me forward, because the battle system is just like, ugh. But like just I love the world. I think Squall himself is a fascinating character. I think he's a very good representation of how introvert people are. As one who's, I've been kind of one in the past, but not so much today. But I kind of understand his thought process. I like how the other characters also, especially Laguna, and like along with Kira's and Ward, when you do those segments, I think those are fascinating elements to the game. Like you said, the music helps really drive everything. I think Fisherman's Horizon, I think, is one of the best themes ever made by Nobuo Uematsu in the entire Final Fantasy series. I could hear the piano version of that all day and just relax. But, yeah, there are some silly plot points, like the whole orphanage thing, but a lot of people complain about that and say that ruined the game for them, but it's not important to the story. I mean, it's dumb, it's silly. I can agree with everyone there, but it has no meaning to the overall plot. It doesn't ruin anything. It's just like, oh, well, that's just a dumb fun fact. And it's like, oh, carry on.
It's like, oh, we all grew up together, but we forgot. And it's like,
yeah.
I don't like
the
this.
only thing you need to get out of that is that Squall has a connection to Elone. That's it.
So, and I think though, that's one of an instance where I view that and it makes me cringe, but at the same time, I think about it in terms of, well, development was rushed and it feels like they like maybe had some more explanation. They're going to do something a little bit different, but they just ran out of time and they're like, how can we just tie this all up real quick? And they're like, all right, screw it. Let's just do an orphanage and they're all related. Like, and that's, I don't know. And I apologize if that's a spoiler, but
not only that,
anyways,
I wasn't a fan of the disc 4. Like, most of the content from the previous 3 discs are not accessible to you anymore. And I was like, it's like, to 100% complete this, I have to do it in the exact order it wants you to. So you have to look at a strategy guide. Now, granted, FF9 to an extent did this. Not as badly, though. I mean, you could go back to most places in 9, but 8, like, almost everything was cut off to you in 8 because, you know, a plot point on the story, it makes sense, but gameplay-wise, it's very annoying. They could at least let you go back to Disc 3 and take care of that stuff, but, you know.
Very cool. So, that's our off-the-cuff thoughts on 8. Our Final Fantasy 8. What is next in line?
Next in line, I see here is, we already talked about it, FF12 here. Got the PS2 Collector's Edition in my hand. Very beautiful case. It is. This is definitely one of my favorite Collector's Editions here. It's like Steelbook, and it has Yoshitaka Amano's design of Gabranth in the back of it. Just like, very well done. Very beautiful looking. And again, great game. Not a perfect game, has some flaws to it, but great experience. I put a lot of hours into it.
Completely agree. My pick here, we already talked about it. I think we're getting to that point where we're going to be covering a lot of the same games, but there's still some ones out there. But Final Fantasy IV, I put it at this point, and like I said before, whenever I'm trying to put this game somewhere where it feels like it makes sense, like it's a great game. I loved it when I played it originally. But I just can't ever seem to find a good place to put it because when I put it like down this low, it feels like it's too low. But then when I put it higher, I feel like, well, would you really put it above Final Fantasy 12? Because, you know, I own 4 copies of 12 and I love playing that game. So I don't know. It's kind of hard for me to like really put it in a good spot there, but I'm putting it where it is and, you know, is what it is. So moving on, what's
opinions, man? People are going to call me out for 7. I know that, but
I called you out
Yeah.
for 7. So
Next on the list is this is kind of more of a personal thing. If anything, I can acknowledge that age has hit it like a brick wall, but pull up here and Final Fantasy XI. Mystery, romance, adventure, community, fantasy. These were the
frustration, agitation.
Yes, these are words that are uttered to you when you first want to get this game. And I was like 13 when this first came out in 2003. And I had to ask my dad to put his credit card on the thing. And you know how parents are. They're like, I don't know what I'm putting my credit card on. But I made good use of it. I eventually got my own card and put it on mine. But when I was old enough. But the for its time, it was an incredible experience. It had a strong community similar to 14, and I would argue an even stronger one because in that game you are so heavily dependent on the person next to you that you really have no choice but to make friends on there. And there were I put it more higher on the list than I should because while the online elements to it, especially today, are frustrating, and they were even frustrating back then, just to get access to points of the story, you had to learn patience. Really had to learn patience. Like, it took all day to grind just one level. And at the time, like, it was like level 75 was the max level. And like, starting at 50, you had to do like an annoying, awful hard quest to get just access to 5 more levels of the game. All the way up to 75. And getting 74 to 75 for the first time, it felt like heaven to me. Like, oh my god, I finally got it. And, but if you play it today, it's, there is still a very heavy veteran scene at endgame, but you're not going to really find anyone in the lower levels. Very rarely you are, or like an active lower level community. So, but they have changed things a lot over the years. They have made the trust NPC system where you can, make your own party of NPCs who are actually their AIs are pretty well programmed. They know what to do in certain scenarios. Like if anyone's hurt, the healer will heal them. The healers will cast protect. The tanks will tank the monsters unless you're the tank. And they're well designed. So you can pretty much play that game all the way up to the more recent expansions, which kind of do require people, but that's where the community is. So it's a little easier to find people, but if you get into this game, just know if you want to do all the story content, you are going to spend a long period of your gaming time getting there. Like, you need to dedicate yourself to get to it. So I don't highly recommend getting into it unless you are willing to put in the time or work for it. It does have a great story. It's a story worth the Final Fantasy name, to be sure, but the MMO aspect of it is very old and archaic today, and you do have to deal with that. And it does have a sub on top of it. They never took the sub fee away. So, like, just word of caution. It's a great game. Just be careful.
Yeah, my thoughts with Final Fantasy XI. Basically, I bought it when it came out. Same experience as you. Like, I was too young to really have like a debit card. So I paid money for it, and I had to get my dad to like try to put in his debit card for it. And he was not having that. He did not understand why I spent money on a game and then I still had to pay every month. He could not understand that. So we ended up returning the game, and I never ended up playing it. And I don't know if that was a good choice or not, but I do really want to revisit that game now and really experience the game. I've heard that the expansions are where the story is at. The like really good story. The base game is not quite as good as the expansions. So I don't know if that is the case or not.
That's fair criticism of it.
Yeah. So you know what? One day I'm going to put in the hours and I'm going to go through that. Hopefully Square does not get rid of the game before then. but I'll have to give it a shot. So,
and just to give people context to my experience with 11, I played it the very first day it came out in North America in 2003, and and I played all the way actively up till 2010, where I officially quit the game. But I have come back per expansion to finish the expansions, and then just quit again. So I got the gist of the story in 11 is all done now. No more expansions are coming. Story expansions are coming out. So if you play 11 and play through the entirety of it, you've gotten the whole story.
Yeah. So, and from what I heard, if you want to go from beginning to end, it's going to take a while, but it's worth it. So, very cool. Now from there, what was your next game in line?
Did we do yours? This is number.
Well, I didn't incorporate the online games. I don't want to run out of games. So what was your next pick? And I'll just pick I'll tell you mine.
Okay, my next on the list is Final Fantasy VIII right here. Original copy, not greatest hits.
You said Final Fantasy VIII?
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Great game. I said, worth playing through, but it does have problems.
Yep, for sure. So yeah, okay. So I think where I'm at is I put Final Fantasy V down, and we already talked about that game enough. You had it in your top 5, and again, I appreciated it for what it was at the time, but the story didn't really jive with me. So I'm gonna give it another run through here one of these days, and I'll let you all know if it's changed my mind. And I think it will, because I'm a lot more into the gameplay than I used to be. So I'll have to give it a chance. But just moving on here, we have what's your next pick?
Number 11 on my list is the one that started it all. I have the original American NES version in my hand. Is Final Fantasy 1.
Boom. What are you have any thoughts about Final Fantasy?
It's the one that started it all. It's when you play it, it's clearly inspired by Dragon Quest before it, but the beautiful thing about it is it definitely did enough on its own to definitely stand on its own. You had the job, you could pick what jobs you want at the beginning. It's actually very simple and very mainstreamed enough that it's very simple to pick up compared to other RPGs. RPGs back then really made things more complex than it used to, I noticed. But Final Fantasy really is one of the first that brought it to people, and it was oh, this is actually pretty simple to play. I can understand this. And while the game is still pretty hard until near the end when you get class upgrades and everything's easy, but it's still a fantastic game to play through. I think if you really want to know where it all began, I would definitely play the NES version. But if you are someone that can't get used to that old style graphics, they have remade it plenty of times. You can play it on the Final Fantasy Origins package for PS1. You can play it on the Game Boy Advance in the Dawn of Souls collection. You can play it in, I think the definitive version, which is the PSP version, has beautiful graphics, and they revamped the system a little bit to ease in modern players more. And they do have them on mobile devices technically also, based on the PSP version. But I mean, if you want to know where it all began, I mean, this is definitely worth your time. It's a great game.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I really like Final Fantasy 1. I think it has a lot of it's, for me, I get chills playing it. Maybe not chills, but just kind of I'm very excited to play it, because whenever I do, because it's the first one, you can see the foundation of one of my favorite RPG series, and it's really, really good. Especially if you compare it to other Nintendo games, it's really got a very, very I think it's a step higher than most Nintendo games. So it's really well done. So it is. It's the first one. I mean, I guess that's the best way to put it. For me, however, I put Final Fantasy 13 in this spot. We did an entire discussion video on Final Fantasy 13, and mostly it was not positive. However, that doesn't mean I hate the game per se. I only hate it a little bit. Like I said, it's like I said in the original review, and you said the same thing. It's a very beautiful game. It has a lot of good ideas going into it. There's some good moments in the game. It's got a great soundtrack, but it's oddly used. The battle system's really cool and how like intricate you can get down with the strategy, but it's like I don't know. It's a little like fatiguing for me. How linear it was. All in all, I don't think it was the highest moment in the Final Fantasy franchise, but it was a major mark in the franchise, and I know there's a lot of people out there that really like it, and I enjoy talking about it. So that's kind of why I stuck it where it is. But what got any thoughts with 13?
I mean, yeah, I know we've already gone over in detail, but it's basically like I like the setup to it. I like the premise to it. I like what's going on with it. The lore is interesting. And I did enjoy the battle system despite some of my complaints with it. But, oh, man, the story and the execution of it all. It's like the writing is just so awful. It's like it was just baffling to me. And then like the dungeon layouts were like so monotonous. And I mean, monotony is what just explains this game in just so detailed. That's why you're gonna see it's gonna be in the very lower part of my list. I mean, just some of these things just can't. I just find it baffling that this came through one of the greatest RPG developers. It's like, how could you, like, both Japanese and English version I hear, it's like all this execution of direction is just so baffling. It's like amateur level, if anything. It's like, I'm not a professional writer. I'm not a professional director, but like, I can see clear as day, these were just like awfully put together scenes. It's, I mean, some of the characters I like Lightning, I like Saz, but then there's like characters like Snow that are so hard to like till like the very end of the game, where he like goes from just like unbearable to here to like, he's kind of okay now.
Okay, I can stand a guy for like a little bit, but like, let's not get crazy. But yeah, so it is what it is, and it's always going to be, whenever people talk about the Final Fantasy franchise, you can't talk about the Final Fantasy franchise without bringing up 13, even if that's for how bad somebody thought it was. It did spark 2 spinoffs, and it spun off Type 0 and Final Fantasy 15. So it's been a major part of the franchise for a long time. So is what it is. So moving on from there, what is your next pick? Number 12.
Yeah, let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, we're on number 12 now. That would be, and it's not, these games are not really on the lower of the list because they're bad or anything in particular. It's, well, maybe a few of them, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. But it's just like they didn't just have as strong an impact on me as the ones before it. So, but next on the list, this one did not actually come out in America till the DS version. And that is Final Fantasy III. I'm holding the DS version in my hand. And this is a pretty good game. It's they definitely took a step up from 1, where they offer.
I missed which one. I missed
Fantasy
which one
3.
it was. I'm sorry
if I didn't.
Oh, okay.
If I didn't verbalize that, but they took a step up from Final Fantasy 1 in many ways. The world was bigger. You could change your jobs under the right circumstances, like if you had enough CP, I believe it was called. And you could do like various combinations to get you through the game. They took everything that made FF1 good, and they made it better in 3, which is definitely awesome, because they definitely made some missteps with FF2, and I think they really took that to heart, and they really just like ramped up what they were capable of in Final Fantasy 3, and they just reaped the benefits from that. I mean, this was like the first official job system that Final Fantasy had and has been famous for in various titles to this day, spin-off or main series. And FF3 is the one that really kicked off that. Now, There are some things about it, like, there are times when there's like bosses that are like, that feel impossibly hard to beat unless you switch to certain jobs, which was kind of disheartening because I kind of wish they let you make a combination that you like and able to work with what's given to you. And I didn't like you made it feel forced. Like there's like a Garuda boss fight and like that boss feels so impossible to beat unless you get like a party of dragoons and just overwhelm it with jump attacks. And there are times like that. And the final dungeon is much longer than it should be. Which pretty much like 3 dungeons in one. But besides that, I mean, like great music, great battle system. It like I said again, it just took everything one did and made it better.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I think the first time I first played the ROM, down emulated version of it, and I had to get a fan translation of it. And dude, I was impressed for a regular Nintendo game. Like this game is just like, this game was performing. It was putting on a show. Like there was like animations, there was explosions, like you had airships flying around and stuff. Like while you're on the overworld, like there's a dragon that picks you up and like takes you all over the place. Like it does a lot of stuff. At one point, you're miniaturized. I mean, like they really like put on a show for a Nintendo game. They went above and beyond what you can do in a Nintendo game that I think no one else in their right mind was doing stuff like this. Because you didn't have to. I mean, this is like a example of gaming where it's just artwork, right? But because the game was so impressive visually, I know that they had to cut out or restrict a lot of the story. And when I was playing it, I was very much a story guy. So I had a hard time getting into it for that reason, although it does have a fair amount of story in the beginning of the game. But to this day, I've actually never finished Final Fantasy 3, so I will wear that shame proud. But one day I'm going to have to finish this game and really give a fair opinion on it. But for me, I put Final Fantasy 2 as my next one. And this is probably kind of odd one where I would rank it this far ahead of some other games. But I think that gameplay wise, I hate Final Fantasy 2 and it makes me never want to play it. However, I really, really like the story of it. And especially for a Nintendo game, man, like this is a good story for a Nintendo game. Like maybe not for like a PlayStation 4 game, but like for a Nintendo game, like this is a really good story. I don't think that you're going to find anything else on Nintendo that's like telling a story like this. Even if it is kind of like copying Star Wars a little bit and everything like that. Like, dude, it's a good game, dude. So I really liked it. I didn't really like the battle system and that or the level up system, even though like most modern games today kind of use a similar system like Skyrim where, whatever you do, it'll level up. I don't think they really implemented it that well, but I do like the fact that they are experimenting and trying new things. And all in all, it's all about the story for me with Final Fantasy 2. Some of the music is really good too. So that's why I'm putting Final Fantasy 2 where it's at. But what did you think about Final Fantasy?
I liked Final Fantasy 2, but like my opinion, like most people's, is that the gameplay is broken. Like even if you play it,
yeah, like pretty much if you play
broken,
it, yeah,
it can be easily exploited with at the beginning of the game. Like you can max everyone's stats in just like a few battles just by like canceling and entering, canceling and entering, canceling and entering. Even in the later versions, like you can use like the shield trick where you constantly keep using the shields during one battle, and you can max it to 8, level 8, the max level of the shield, and nothing can hit you, like physical or magic, till like near the end of the game.
Which that's a crazy last dungeon, I thought. But
yeah, Pandemonium's a crazy last dungeon. Like, and another thing about that game too is its dungeon layout is just, it's so poorly made. And this is from the same people who made the first one. It's like they put a lot of traps inside like trap rooms that have like powerful enemies in it. And like that just got frustrating because you have absolutely no way of like predicting that. It's just like, it just happens when you go through it. And that's pretty much how each dungeon is the entire game. I mean, it's one thing to put that in one dungeon, but like every dungeon layout is essentially the same, just just aesthetically it's different in the story. But I mean, but I enjoyed the story aspect of it, especially for an NES game. Like you said, it does a lot of things right in that department. I think 4 is where it really kicked off, but 2 was a pretty good try for a NES game.
Yeah, I feel like Final Fantasy 2, that's like where they kind of planted the seeds for like telling like a really engaging, or at least a really ambitious story. And you really saw those seeds sprout with Final Fantasy 4, where it like actually like it's like, okay, like we kind of figured some things out. Final Fantasy 2 was a test run, but I don't know. With me, like I said, like the gameplay wise, like that game is just atrociously bad for so many reasons. However, like the story itself just really, I didn't expect that, because coming from Final Fantasy 1 to 2, you know, like Final Fantasy 1 didn't really have a story. It just kind of had like a premise. It had some things that would happen, but like not really like a story like you'd think. And then 2 was actually like, wow, they're actually like going all out here. Like people are dying. Like this is a story. So I was surprised. So from there, what was your next?
Funny you say that, because number 13 on my list is actually Final Fantasy 2. We never got an American version of the second one, just like FF3. The first time we got it was in Origins. Like every time Final Fantasy 1 got a remake, 2 followed right along with it. So you can play it on PS1, GBA, PSP, iOS. You can play them on there. The one I have, I think, is the definitive version of it, that the most enjoyable way to play it. And it's, I mean, it's a pretty decent title. I wouldn't highly prioritize on anyone's Final Fantasy list, but if you're someone who needs to go through the history of it, I mean, this one isn't going to, you're going to run into some problems and some frustrations, but not enough that you're going to turn the game off.
Cool. So, what I picked was, Final Fantasy 3, and, we just talked about that. Mm-hmm. So, very cool. What did you pick for your next one? I think we're getting to the last two.
I mean, people.
You know, one of the games we have not talked about, and one of them we have. So
let's see here.
So what's your next pick?
Which one do I find worst? Is it you or you? Because these two I don't really like. So, people already know me enough to know this well. Number 14 on my list, FF13. I have the PS3 original copy in my hand. I mean, I won't go on a bound and say it's a terrible game. There's definitely positive qualities to it. I've seen people make pretty strong arguments about some of the theming of its game and why some things actually do kind of work and not work. And have been educated on it pretty well from other people. That's been willing to change my perspective a little bit, but it's just only enough to make me put it in it's pretty okay category. But it definitely reaches the second to the bottom of my list for it. It's the one I've enjoyed one of the ones I've enjoyed the least of these.
Yeah. I put Final Fantasy 1 here, and as much as I like that game, mostly I have to be honest, I like playing it because it's the first one, not because I particularly enjoy it. And that's because I'm playing the original version on the Nintendo. That game I don't want to say it's too old, but the fact that there's no auto targeting when you a enemy gets defeated, and like there's like the battle system is slow, you can only buy one potion at a time. It's just, I don't know. There's not much of a story there, so I realize the significance of it, and I like playing it for just like because it's the first one, but I usually don't enjoy playing it, so. That's why I put.
Yeah, I mean, people look for different things in their RPGs, and Final Fantasy 1 is it's one of the first JRPG titles, not like the first, but one of the first ones that really set off the genre back in the 80s. And it definitely delivered for what people's expectations were then. But people today look for different things in RPGs. Like they want a strong, cohesive story, and Final Fantasy 1 doesn't really provide that. I mean, it's a product of its time, and, it's good that people respect it for that, but that doesn't mean that they have to, enjoy it as much as someone else does. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, is what it is. But for this last game, we both, I think, picked the same game, Final Fantasy 15.
Oh.
Right?
Yes.
I was like, wait, what? Did I miss
right here, deluxe edition in my hand. Looking so forward to it. I was thinking to myself, this is kind of worrying because development process seems very vague, and they just delayed it 2 more months. It can't be for a day one. Simply for a day one patch. Developers usually don't care about that, and
there still was a day one patch that was a gigabyte.
Fortunately, I was right. And it says in the back of the box, 2 unforgettable stories, 1 incredible experience between the movie and the game. It's like, oh, that's not something I'm going to forget, Tabata.
Yeah, you know what? If I, because this is my favorite, it's like, not this game is my favorite. This is the favorite list, per se. Like, this one is the one that, I just, there's very little on it for me to, really grab a hold of, because just about everything with the game has, really disappointed me. Like, the fact that, critical plot points are behind, paywalls, why did this person go blind, or the fact that they're changing the ending basically and making me still pay for it. I can't get behind that. That's not what Final Fantasy is about. I don't like that. That doesn't make me feel good. The original game, they just had so many plot points that were just not very well thought out. And I mean, yes, the Brotherhood thing was kind of cool, and they had some cool dungeons, and it was pretty, it looked pretty good. And there's a handful of tracks that I liked, but outside of that, dude, this shit, I do not want this game to go down this route. But some of the other games, 13, I felt there was a couple of things that I really had huge issues with, but it didn't make me feel like I was really worried about the franchise. I felt okay, they know what they did wrong. They just got to not do that again. When I see this, this game just makes me really feel like Square just doesn't know what they're doing. So that's why I put it where it is. I know a lot of people really love it. Some people really put it in their top 3. And I think that's cool that there's a variety of opinion on it, but I just didn't like it.
Between 13 and 15, 13 at least has some pretty good redeemable qualities to it. It's a gorgeous game. Well, both look pretty good, but 13 looks really good in its style, and character designs are really good and everything. Everything in 15 just feels so off to me. Not just for the fact that it's a incomplete hot mess of a game, that the story's not even done yet. We're not going to get probably the full thing until end of this year. And we've made so many videos about this before. What can I say at this point? My opinion hasn't changed much. That I'm glad they're adding this story content into this incomplete game, but it should have never been like this, ever. Someone pays $60, you give them a full package. If you can't deliver on that $60 package, delay it. And I know there is probably some legal situation happening at Square Enix. I have a feeling they wanted to. I can't speak on their behalf. I don't work there. But I have a feeling if they were able to, then they would. But from what I heard, that Tabata was not being a very good director, because consistently he was making the team go back and redo things after he decides to himself. Okay, or someone decides on his behalf. Okay, it needs to be like this, or we have to cut a corner like this. And I've heard that the developers got tired out from these consistent changes they made to the game, because they had no clear vision of what they wanted from it. And cutting it out, it's just, it's such a messy game. It's you can say what you want about any of these Final Fantasies I have on my table right now, but they at least are complete packages of a game, rather if they have issues with them or not, or something that could have been improved on. And even 13's credit, 13 is a complete feeling game from start to end. I feel like I got everything I needed to from it, despite its poor directing and poor writing. It ended. We didn't need 2 sequels to it because it felt like a complete game. They did it anyways, but
yeah. So hey, maybe once the game's finally complete, we have all the stuff out there, and you can get the PC version with all the stuff included for a reasonable price, and it's all included in the game, and you can play it from start to finish with everything in there. Maybe then when I play that version, hopefully this game will get pushed up a little bit further on my list. I could see it potentially going above 13 on my list, which is almost middle road. Possibly a little higher. Who knows? Maybe they'll do some crazy stuff. But like as of right now, because of the business practices and just like everything going on with it, I just can't put it above any other game that actually was complete and had a soul. And I don't know. Final Fantasy 15 had a soul too, but it's a personal opinion. So that's where I'm at with that.
We get something as incredible as 9 here, and then years later we get something like 15, where everything becomes live services now instead of experiences.
But that's our Final Fantasy talk. We still had 2 other topics here, but we're going pretty long, so we'll probably have to get this pretty quick, I would imagine. Yeah, real quick, Leon, he wants to know, what are your thoughts on World of Final Fantasy?
It's a pretty good game. It's a very nice nostalgic game. It's not one that's really adult oriented. It's more of a childlike game. It's got some elements of Pokemon in it where you're capturing certain monsters and you're having them join you, and you stack them together per square to make interesting, unique combinations. It's a pretty serviceable story. It's meant more to be like a nostalgic one. There are some good moments in it. I think probably whatever price it is right now, I think it's worth getting it. It does have a traditional turn-based battle system that's pretty fun. And if you're a fan of the Final Fantasy series in general, there's stuff in there to like.
Yeah, I haven't played it. I'm interested in playing it. The art style originally turned me off. I don't like that art style, but I'm going to pick it up eventually. And I don't know. I'll let you all know what I think. But I appreciate you bringing it up, Leon, because now I've been kind of looking up price judging it, and it's getting pretty cheap. So I'll have to pick it up soon enough. And real quick, he had a quick thought on Final Fantasy VII. So let's just get that out there real quick. He said, my thing about Cloud's appearance and attitude, let's remember that at the beginning of the game, he's been brainwashed. He thinks he's Zack, and Zack was more of a goofy guy, more lightheaded, and Cloud, original one, he was more of a dreamer, but he was more serious. Now, the look and feel, well, makes sense since he's no soldier. He was a grunt officer. So basically, he's just saying that, hey, like with the new Cloud design, that it makes sense because to him that Cloud being a little more goofy and everything makes sense with the original game, because if you remember, Cloud thought he was Zack to a degree, right? And Zack was...
I think it's more of a... I think it's a mesh of Cloud's personality, because if you play Crisis Core, like Cloud's personality is kind of like more the same, a little more lighthearted before like all the Mako stuff happens. I think Zack's experiences as soldier is what meshed into Cloud more than Zack's personality itself, because Cloud is still a little bit of a hardhead, especially at the beginning. He's kind of like, playing the role of the badass mercenary, doesn't care about anything but getting paid, but he lightens up more when he's around people he's familiar with, or like with Eris. But a lot of times he still plays that tough guy attitude with it, which is not very much a characteristic of Zack. Zack's a very like go get 'em, like reach for the stars type of person, very optimistic and everything. And I wouldn't say like Cloud's like a downer or anything, but he's certainly not the most optimistic person either. He's a very get the job done type of person. And like he has personal motivation, like after we get out of Midgar, and explains the situation, but I don't think Cloud fully inherited everything from Zack. I think he's still his own person, but he has his brain washed, he's brainwashed to the point that he believes he wasn't soldier. He believes, the stories Zack told him, he believes those stories were him and not Zack.
His life, yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, he brings up a good point. He says that he thinks with the remake that Cloud will have to, his technical ability, even though he thinks he's in soldier, he needs to be like a little clunky, like not as accurate or powerful in a technical way. And over the course of the game, you'll see a transition from Cloud and to kind of like Zack, or even above that. And these are all cool ideas if they can explore some of that earlier material a little bit more, which is one of the reasons why I am excited about the 7 remake, as skeptical as I am about it. But I mean, yeah, dude, there's a variety of things they could do. I mean, he's pointing out, hey, they could do some time jumps and really just delve into like showing the difference of these characters and who they are before and after. And there's a lot of interesting things that they're going to do. And, you know, they're spreading it out to 2 or 3, possibly more. We don't know for sure how many games. And to take a typical 40-hour game or 35-hour game and to drag it out to 120 hours of content is they're going to be adding a lot of stuff. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see everything that they add. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So hopefully we get some more information soon. But with that, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Not much. It's just everyone has their own opinion on how Cloud's interpreted, so no one's really right or wrong. It's just how you decided to interpret the character situation. So, you know, just hope they're just as faithful as they were to the original FF7, and, you know, then we can just go back to our own, like, forms of interpretation of it. But, you know, it's probably not going to be exactly perfect as we all think in our heads it is. So, you know, expect, you know, the unexpected, I guess.
Very cool. Yeah, exactly. Well said. So, with that said, I believe this wraps us up here. I think we hit every topic we said we were going to. The Final Fantasy rating, that actually went way longer than I thought it was going to be. But I think it was a good discussion. I think y'all enjoyed it, hopefully. So let us know in the comments. And like I said, if you are still watching at this point, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because there's no way you went through this entire thing and did not enjoy it. So we'd appreciate that, and we will catch you all next week. So until next time.
All right, see you guys.